Welcome to Tall Oak Homestead. My name is Carrie. Thanks for joining me today. So on the weekend, I was cleaning out one of my freezers and I noticed I still had some tomatoes from the summer, maybe about 17 pounds frozen. And I thought that's just shy of 20 pounds, which is a perfect amount to make some marinara sauce. So this morning after I did some running around, I stopped and got some extra tomatoes and I thought I would bring you along as I make some marinara sauce to can. So the recipe I'm following today is in my All New Ball book of canning and preserving. This is a wonderful book. I'll put the link below in the description box. And I'm following the recipe on page 204, oven roasted marinara. Now typically, what you would do would be to roast your tomatoes and your onions in the oven before boiling them down, but because these are still frozen, I'm going to need to put them in this pot and put them on the stove and start breaking them down. Because they are frozen, I'm going to put a little bit of water in the bottom of the pot so that they don't scorch. I'm going to put the frozen ones first in the pot, and then I will add my fresh tomatoes. Now you'll notice as I'm putting the tomatoes in that I have a wide variety of tomatoes here. I have some yellow tomatoes, some cherry tomatoes, some Roma tomatoes. These are just a great cross section of all the tomatoes that I grew this summer. Some of them, they don't produce a large crop all at once. So what I do is as they come in, I freeze them so that I can use them for a project later on. So let's get this pot on the stove. A little bit of water in it before I start putting in any more tomatoes. I'm going to turn the burner on about medium. And then I'm going to get a little bit of water put in there so that we don't scorch. Okay, we're going to get the rest of these fresh tomatoes cut up. I'm just going to put them in the container that I had the tomatoes in overnight in the fridge to thaw. I'm not going to worry too much about getting the core of the tomato, because what's going to happen is once these tomatoes boil down in the pot with the others that I have that are frozen, I'm going to put it through a food mill. So the food mill takes out all of the seeds, all of the skin, and anything else that may be in the tomatoes. I have pulled all the tops off of all of them, so I don't have to worry about there being any tops. Okay, that's a fair amount of tomatoes. I think what I might do is put these in a separate pot and get them started to cook down, and then while we wait for the frozen tomatoes to come up to temperature and start to break down, and then that way it might just speed the process along a little bit for us. I'm going to grab another large pot and put the tomatoes, the ones we just cut into, and get them started on the stove. Now I'm not sure how many of these I'm going to get in here. Hopefully I can get the whole amount in. Oh, it looks like I can, yeah. Perfect. So this recipe, as I said, normally you roast them in the oven, but I'm going to just cook these on the stovetop to break them down. Once they've broken down considerably, we're going to put them through the food mill. Then we're going to add our other ingredients once it's gone through the food mill and let it cook down a little bit to thicken. Then we're going to process. So by process, I mean we're going to water bath can them so that they're stable. So one of the things about when you're preserving tomatoes or any sort of canning, you have to be precise. Typically, when I'm following a recipe, I don't always follow the recipe. I will add or remove certain things, but when you're canning, you have to be very specific. The ratios need to be correct so that your food is stable on the shelf, so that it's safe to eat. So what I mean by that is you have to have the right amount of acid, the right amount of salt, the right amount of whatever your food is that you're preparing. So it's all, you have to follow the recipe very carefully so as you don't end up with spoiled food. Because let's face it, this is a lot of work making something like this. So you want to take the time and do it right. You're going to be able to enjoy it in the nice long winter months. So I'm going to get this on the stove. And again, with this one, I'm going to put a little bit of water in. Okay, I'm going to put the lid on, and we're going to have to let that sit. I will keep a close eye on both of these. But I think what I'm going to do in the meantime is I'm going to start cutting some onion. We do need onion for this recipe. So we need 20 pounds of tomatoes, and we're going to need 1.5 cups of chopped onion. I'm just going to rinse off my cutting board here, off my knife, and I like to use a white onion. Might not be quite enough, but I think what I'll do is just get a little measuring cup, and we will put it in as we cut. I'm going to chop the onion fairly fine. And I think what I'm going to do is once the tomatoes have started to boil down a little bit more, and I'm able to put them into one pot, I am going to saute these onions and start to caramelize them before I put them in with the tomatoes. Just need to free up some space on my stove. Just not sure how long that's going to take for these tomatoes to boil down, the ones that are frozen. I guess the nice thing is that there's a lot of smaller tomatoes in there, so it shouldn't take too long. And the nice thing about this marinara sauce, it's just plain. It's just a plain, ooh, these onions are strong. It's just a plain tomato-based sauce. It has a little bit of herbs in it, a little bit of, it calls for oregano, but we prefer basil. So as I mentioned, following the recipe carefully is important, but switching out herbs is not going to be a problem. Oh dear, my eyes are watering incredibly much. That's a good strong onion. It's going to have lots of flavor. Once you open up this jar of tomato sauce, you can heat it up and eat it as is. You can add a bit of cream to it. You can add a bit of meat to it. Ground beef, ground pork, chicken, whatever you desire. It's going to get that little core out of there. So it gives you quite a few options. Or if you're making a lasagna, you can just pour that into your recipe. You don't have to worry about any seasoning because we're going to be seasoning it once we get all the tomatoes cooked and through the food mill. Okay. There we go. It's about 1.5 cups of onions, which I think we will just keep to the side for now. You can see the fresh ones are starting to really break down. The frozen ones are going to take a little bit longer. Okay, as you can see, the fresh tomatoes are pretty much boiled down and ready for the food mill. The frozen ones are getting there. Need a little bit more time. Okay, the recipe called for 6 cloves of garlic to be chopped. I prefer my garlic to be minced. I don't care for my garlic to be chopped. So I did that. We've got that ready to go. I'm still working on my garlic from last year's garden, and I will say it is just delicious. I have about 30 left to last me through the winter, so I'm hoping it'll last me through. So now we're going to get prepared with the food mill. So just have a hand one. You can put it together. You put your little doohickey in. There we go. Okay. So what you do is you put your food mill on the side of a bowl or a pot. I'm choosing to use this bowl. And you put your tomatoes in there and you just turn the mill. And what that does is it pushes the tomato through the sieve and it leaves all of the tomato skin and the seeds in the actual food mill itself, which you can dispose of later. You get a little measuring cup. So you simply get your tomatoes. Be careful because this is hot. Pour it in. And start turning. You can get electric food mills, but for the amount of time I actually use a food mill, I'm quite happy to use what I have. Okay, the frozen tomatoes are just about ready to go through the food mill. Now that I have a little bit more space on the stovetop, I'm going to start to warm up this burner. Put a bit of olive oil in the pan. And then once that warms up, I'm going to add the onions and start sauteing those. All right, let's get the onions added. We'll let those start to sweat out and we'll start to caramelize, and then I will add the garlic near the end. Okay, the pot with the frozen tomatoes is cooked enough, we can now start to put them through the food mill as well. It's interesting, you can see with the frozen tomatoes, the skins came off much easier. I probably could have left them to thaw out a little more in the pan and then just picked the skins off, but I wasn't too worried because I knew I was going to be putting them through the food mill. Okay, we finished putting all of the tomatoes through the food mill. I certainly won't have to do an arm exercise anytime soon. So now what we can do is add the rest of the ingredients, and then we're going to put this back on the stove and we're going to let it simmer for probably an hour or two to let it reduce down and concentrate. So we're going to add the rest of our ingredients. The onions and garlic have finished sauteing, so I'll add those in. Near the end of the stewing process, I will put in my immersion blender just to make sure that there aren't any big chunks of onion or garlic. Calls for 1 cup of dry red or white wine. I don't drink red wine. I do drink white wine, so I do have some of that on hand. Add that in. That's a tablespoon of salt. Calls for oregano, but as I said, we're going to use basil. Smells delicious. 2 teaspoons of black pepper. Garlic cloves have been added, and it calls for bay leaves, but I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give this a good stir, mix everything together. And then I'm going to add the bay leaves. Oh, it smells delicious. So this is just pureed tomatoes. All fresh from the garden this summer, with the exception of maybe 2.5 pounds of fresh tomatoes. Calls for 2 bay leaves, and mine are tiny. I'm almost out, so I'm going to add in, oh, there are tiny pieces here, so I'll add in 2, 4, 5. So I'll have to remember that I have 5 in there for when I fish them out to put them in the jars. So I'm going to put these back on the stove. I'm going to put it on low to simmer. We're going to leave it there for an hour or two to thicken up. I'm glad I reread the recipe again because I forgot to add the lemon juice. And that is a very important part to make sure all the acidity is balanced, which helps to make sure that our product is going to be stable on the shelf and safe to eat. So I'll get that stirred in. Cover that up with its lid. And we're going to let that simmer for a couple of hours. Okay, our sauce has sat on the stove for a couple of hours simmering. It's at a great consistency, so I'm going to start getting it into jars and getting it into the canners. I've got 2 of my canners on the stove because I think we're probably going to get more than 1 canner's worth full here. Just going to start filling these up. I did have my jars in the oven just to warm them up a little bit because I wasn't going to put this hot liquid into a cold jar. That's just asking for trouble. It could have shattered. And I do have both of the canners on the stove heating up so that they will be ready when I have these jars filled up. I have tasted the sauce and it tastes delicious. I did actually have to add a little bit more salt. Just found that it needed a little bit more salt after sitting for a while. All in all, it's very tasty. Okay. We're doing a 1/2 inch headspace. I probably could have let it cook down even further. I don't like my sauce too thick, so I'm quite happy with this consistency. Okay. One more, and we can get this batch in the first canner. Okay. All right, I'm just going to get a paper towel, and we're going to wipe the top of these jars with some vinegar. Remember, you always want to wipe your top of your jar to make sure that there's none of your product on the rim itself, because that will affect the seal. You want to make sure it's nice and clean, and as you're going around cleaning your rims, you're also feeling for any nicks or chips, because that will cause your jar not to seal properly, and it will also affect how it seals, but it could also very well explode in your canner. Okay, I've washed all the lids. I'll put them on top. Get our rings. You just tighten them to touch. You don't tighten them too tightly. Okay, I'm going to get these set up in the steam canner. I'm going to take my lid off. Just going to place it to the side here. It's a little different. The steam canner, you don't immerse your jars in water. It's using the steam from the bottom of the canner to seal the jars. You do put a little bit of vinegar in the bottom with the water, just to prevent the marking on your jars. And I'm also very careful not to make sure that my jars do not touch. Okay, so I've got 6 in here. I'm going to put my lid back on. I'm going to turn the heat up, and I'm going to wait for it to get to the indicator that is based on my elevation, and for mine, and that's what my indicator is here on the top of my pot. That is a T, and that's just the indicator for this particular canner. So once that comes up to the T, I'm going to start my timer, and we have to water bath can these for 40 minutes. Okay, you can hear that the steam canner has reached its temperature where I now need to start my timer. You'll also notice that at the back of the steamer itself, there's a little hole, and that's where the steam escapes. Always turn that away from you. You can get a very bad burn from that, so you need to be very careful. So now I'm going to set a timer for 40 minutes. I'm going to start filling up the second batch of jars for the second canner. Perfect. Okay. I'll get a wipe. So I got a little more jars out of this batch than I expected, but I also think that's because when I weighed my tomatoes, they were frozen. So they were probably weighing a lot more solid as they would not frozen. So I need 4 wide mouth and 1. Okay, everything's had a good wipe. Oh, dropped one of my rings. Okay, 1 extra jar I'm just going to put to the side here. Okay, I'm going to take the lid off this canner. See, I've got the water here starting to heat up. Let's pull the racks out like this and bring my jars over. I'm going to slowly lower this down. I may have to take some water out because all of the jars need to be covered. Okay, perfect. That's a little hot. I will get a bowl and take some of that out. It just needs to be covering the top. It doesn't need to be right to the top of the pot. That will just cause it to boil over. Okay, that should be good. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the lid on and I've got to wait for that to start to boil. Once that starts to boil, that's when I start my timer for 40 minutes. As you can see, the steam canner is still at the maximum point where it's supposed to be at. It's doing well. I've had to lower the heat to maintain that temperature. Should be good. We've got about 35 minutes left on that. Okay, the second canner has finished and it sat for 10 minutes, so it's time to take the second set of jars out. Always lift your jar lid or your pot lid away from you as it's very hot in there. I can still see it bubbling in there. Oh yeah, this guy's still bubbling. It's very hot. You've got to be so careful. Oh, sound we want to hear. Okay, just going to give them a little wipe on the top here. Just get the water off. Oh, there we go, another one. Okay, so that's it. That's marinara sauce in a nutshell, basically. So later in the week, I'm going to be working on a video, working with putting together a little herb garden and planting my summer flowers. Hope you can join me. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye, friend.